Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Garn from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
Depeche Mode, the podcast. My name's John Justice, and I'm glad you're with another episode this week, fellow devotees. Talking about the greatest band on the face of the planet. Why else would I do a weekly Depeche Mode podcast? Got a lot of great emails this week we'll be diving into. Still no news from the band in this new year as we patiently await several different announcements. The possibility of the Mexico Memento Mori show documentary, those 4 fully produced unreleased tracks that we're still anticipating, and perhaps even a separate physical release of the Memento Mori tour, unless the possibility of the Mexico documentary being that live physical release of the tour still remains to be seen, but hopefully we get that information at some point this year. As always, if you want to email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and if you happen to be enjoying this up on YouTube, be sure to go and subscribe to the channel so that you never miss an episode. So, first off, and I believe this is in one of the emails that I have this week, but last week I had talked about an article in my weekly Depeche Mode search that mentioned that the villain in the new Mel Gibson-directed film called Flight Risk, and that would be the character played by Mark Wahlberg, apparently was singing Depeche Mode in that film. Well, it turns out that, from what I'm hearing, he's not singing Depeche Mode in that film. A listener to the podcast actually went and saw that movie, and apparently he was singing a New Order song. So, once again, somebody not familiar with Depeche Mode, and that's a mistake that I haven't heard made for a long time. But, of course, it's one of those memes going around when people want to joke that, you know, New Order is Depeche, Depeche is New Order, and they sound the same, in which they sound absolutely nothing alike. But apparently that article writer was wrong and got Depeche Mode and New Order mixed up. So shame on them. But in my search this week for any new Depeche Mode news, I came across a rather interesting article that I wanted to share with you from a fellow Depeche Mode fan. Now, the author is Tom Falco, and Tom Falco has his own website, Tomversation. And he's written a piece, and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to share it with you and then also give some of my thoughts. The timeless appeal of Depeche Mode. And Tom writes this: I was watching a lot of Depeche Mode videos and concerts this weekend. I don't know why. I mean, I always loved them, but all of a sudden, they were all over my social media. I think it started by me watching a lot of the Fire Aid concert on social media, and from watching those bands, mostly Stevie Nicks over and over, Depeche Mode started popping up, so I started watching them. They weren't part of Fire Aid, but I guess the genre sort of was part of what was at Fire Aid, so the algorithms brought it up. It started on my phone, and then I put them on YouTube on my big screen TV. What I found interesting is that they sort of don't age. Although David Gahan, frontman, is getting gray streaks in his hair now, but he still sings and moves like he always did. He's ageless. Although he has almost been dead more than once, 4 times he had brushes with death and got the nickname the Cat due to his coming back to life over and over. He was also a heroin addict and had a drug-induced heart attack right in the middle of a concert once. I don't say all this to put him down, Tom writes. I say that to build him up. He's invincible. He does his famous twirl through the concerts, enjoying every moment. When you watch him perform, he takes over the stage. His movements, voice, engagement with the audience is incredible. He commands the stage, even when he isn't singing. How many times he gives over the performance to the audience and has them finish singing the songs. David was ranked as number 73 on Q Magazine's list of the 100 greatest singers, and number 27 on its list of 100 greatest frontmen. Founding member Andy Fletcher Fletch passed away in May of 2022. They talk about it in the CBS Sunday Morning News interview. He attached it to the article that I'm reading from. Regarding the video of Enjoy the Silence, my favorite Depeche Mode song, of which just had its 35-year anniversary. Am I right on that? Among so many, I like this video because it shows David and the band over the years. It sort of intercuts with them singing the song in various stages of their career. Love that. Listen, I just wanted to share with you a bit of what he has to say, and he makes a great point about the timelessness of Depeche Mode. You know, clearly the years have gone on. Martin and Dave have aged quite a bit, and it's brought about the question of whether or not the band will even continue. I'm convinced at this point in time, based off of those recent statements that got covered quite extensively and here on the show, that the band will continue in some way, shape, or form. I think the bigger question is whether or not we end up getting a large-scale tour like we did going back to 2023 and 2024. You know, the band is getting on in years, and while Dave is certainly an amazing performer on stage, Tom makes a great point that I was even shocked on this tour how animated Dave continued to be, and felt quite honestly that his stage presence on the Memento Mori tour was leaps and bounds better than what he had done during the Spirit tour. I think part of that, too, is the rejuvenation that Martin and Dave went through in the wake of the passing of Fletch. It feels like, in the absence of getting a proper documentary for the struggles that went on for Spirit, there wasn't a lot of momentum. It felt like more of it was going through the motions, and just anecdotally, again, without knowing extensively how that recording process went down, just going off of the few statements that were made from James Ford and Dave and Martin in the interviews in the run-up to Memento Mori, it certainly seemed as if that was a struggle. They were doing the album, they were going through the motions, went on tour, but there didn't seem to be a genuine level of excitement behind it, wherein when it comes to Memento Mori, the band was now just being Dave and Martin, having lost founding member Fletch, Dave and Martin being so vocal about their finding each other's friendship after all those years. Not saying they needed something to prove, but they put together such an amazing product. And as a tribute to Fletch, it just felt like there was a bit of a rebirth that took place, even as they were getting on in age. One could hardly blame them if they did decide to hang it up, but I think both Martin and Dave love music so much, and this was probably, and again, just based off of the way the interviews played out and having watched so much of the press coverage around the tour, it seemed as if this was the best time that the two of them had together. And they made such a great team. I imagine that they would want to go and, you know, capture that magic at least one more time and create music again, sort of fresh, without having the adjacent attachment of, in the run-up to Memento Mori, Fletch passing away. And again, pure speculation on my part of what could come of the band, but just when you look at the human element of this, that makes sense to me. Memento Mori was supposed to be an album that was done with the three of them, as had been for so many years. Fletch never got to hear any of what Memento Mori turned out to be. The band went and moved on in spite of the passing of Fletch, and so you still sort of have that hanging there, wherein there still is an opportunity for Martin and Dave to move forward just as a duo with their touring team and make another record just simply on their own that's not attached to what had happened in the past. Now, this could just be wishful thinking on my part. And the last point that I want to make regarding the timelessness of Depeche Mode is to bring in Anton Corbijn in all of this. While Anton Corbijn may not be everybody's cup of tea, and I disagree with statements from K-Rock Radio DJ Richard Blade when he said during the Behind the Music documentary that he felt the band could have been more successful with different directors. The one thing that Anton has done with the band ever since they brought him on, going back to the 80s, in giving an artistic direction for Depeche Mode, is it has attributed to that timelessness. Anton Corbijn's art is timeless. You can't really pigeonhole it to any time frame whatsoever. Now, you could, for example, look at the singles release that came out between, Ultra, after it came out after Ultra did, and the artwork that was done for that and the subsequent tour that took place, the singles tour that took place, not utilizing Anton's work and the digital look of it. And I liked all of the artwork surrounding that particular singles project, but there is a datedness to it, whereas the artwork that Anton Corbijn has produced and the videos as well certainly, absolutely has a timeless element to it, which I think leads into what Tom and Tom Versation in his website was attempting to say regarding the stage presence of Dave, but I'm looking at a larger picture of the band in and of itself, not to mention the music. And I would go back and point to sort of that Allen era. You want to go back and listen to earlier Depeche Mode prior to Black Celebration. There's 80s elements in there, there's no doubt. Certainly not on the nose and not nearly as pedestrian as what you would typically go and qualify as 80s music. There's always been a timeless aspect of the band. But as they matured, and certainly this is something that one of the emails mentions as well that I'll spend some time talking about, as the band has matured and grown as artists, they moved away from that. Any sort of element that could go and attach itself since then to any era whatsoever. The only sort of modern, doing that thing with my fingers, not really modern at all when you go back to the early 2000s, of which you could sort of timestamp an album, would maybe be Exciter, given the music of the day at the time. But that music at the time and that minimalist approach that they took for Exciter wasn't really all that mainstream. So most people hearing Exciter, I don't think, would immediately attribute that to very late 80s, early 90s. Very late 90s heading into the 2000s, as being timestamped as that. As fans of alternative rock and knowing the music of that time period when Exciter came out, there's some parallels there. But again, the average individual would never go and hear it that way. Going back and listening to albums pre-Black Celebration, you could say there's a little bit of an 80s bend to it. Certainly you should go back even further, but not nearly as identifiable as, say, your sort of typical 80s bands at all. So really interesting commentary that, got me thinking, obviously, by Tom Falco. And glad that I happened to go and stumble across it. All right, let's get into your listener feedback this week. Your emails, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Or leave a comment up on YouTube. First, let's see. And I have to apologize, too. Mark. I try to make sure I get the names on these, but sometimes the way that I format my notes, I miss it. Mark writes this. Living in Australia since 2012, my first live gig was Black Celebration and that tour. Been a fan since New Life. And only tour I've missed was Spirit. I traveled back to the UK. They were ex-UK, now living in Australia. Traveled back to UK, Glasgow, for the Memento Mori tour last January and got to take my adult sons as well. Paid for them and figured they had suffered, in their words, Depeche Mode all their lives, so what better than to see them live? They enjoyed it. One was impressed by the sound quality. The OV Hydro in Glasgow is just awesome for acoustics. And the oldest said, does it ever end? He's used to 3 or 4 sets at DJ festivals. Anyway, question. I was going through some old hard drives and I stumbled across a 13 CD collection ripped from MP3 called Depeche Mode Mute Bank Collection 1 through 13. Some awesome rarities, pre-mixes of songs, unusual, never before, released mixes, etc. I've attached one I know you like, as you mentioned it on a recent podcast episode. Another is an awesome remix that I believe never saw the light of day. These are just the tip of the 13 CD iceberg. Now, what he did was he sent the live version of I Want You Now from the Devotional Tour with the music arrangement by Alan. He also sent with something that I thought was a bootleg mix of A Pain That I'm Used To. But as I'll mention here from friend of the show, Matt, and friend of mine, this could be the Marceau remix that was included in a 2005 German promo CDR. All the best, writes Mark from Western Australia. So, quick comment. I really enjoyed the Pain That I'm Used To remix. And like I said, I ended up sharing it with my buddy Matt, and he shares his thoughts. He really loves this mix, by the way. It was great to hear the I Want You Now mix again, done by Alan. That musical arrangement on the tour was absolutely fantastic. The sound quality of the actual live track is really, really good. What's interesting about it, though, is, and it could just be me, but Martin seemed slightly off time. And I think a part of it was the added instrumentation that Alan Wilder had put on his remix of I Want You Now for that tour. It may not have been reconciling in my brain, being not accustomed to hearing it that way. Or it could have genuinely been that Martin was a bit out of time. You know, just his timing was just like a touch off on the mix. It didn't really ruin it for me, except for while I was listening to it, I kept kind of wondering, is he on time here or not? And again, it could have been my brain playing tricks on me because of that added instrumentation. But my buddy Matt Abell writes, I love my DM. Oh, so let me back up a little bit so I can explain this. There was an exchange that we had prior to that, and he had commented on how refreshing it was to hear this A Pain That I'm Used To mix without the sound at the beginning of the track. And so we had exchanged some emails based off of the opening of A Pain That I'm Used To, sort of that blaring alarm, the screech of I Feel You, that really long intro on In Chains at the beginning of Sounds of the Universe. And to that he responds, I love my DM, but the abrasive opening of A Pain That I'm Used To, no thank you. It took me a while to grow to love I Feel You. I'm okay with it in concert, but would be quite happy if it never appeared on a set list again. But otherwise, I rarely listen to that track, just not my speed. Please stop with the abrasive, long intros, DM, not needed. Watched the Black Celebration and Music for the Masses documentaries last night. Just can't get enough of them. I had forgotten Dave's comment that initially a concert for the masses was pitched by the band to be a free concert somewhere in Los Angeles. Can you even imagine? Then Dave quickly adds, of course that never happened because no promoter would actually touch it with a barge pole. Seriously, is there a band with a better sense of humor? I mean, I'm biased, but it's not even close. Every one of those guys, other than Alan, maybe, has such a fantastic sense of humor. One more reason that they rule. And by the way, dude, this A Pain That I'm Used To mix is absolutely amazing. I have it on infinite repeat. So, on your next pod, please tell Mark in Geraldton, Western Australia, that Matt in San Juan Island, Washington, says thank you. This mix has instantly cracked my top 5 all-time for DM. I love it. And then please tell my Black Celebration loving girl Monique in Montreal that Matt highly recommends it. I know she will dig it. Thank you as always, Matt. And again, I believe he seems to be under the impression that it is the Marceau mix that he's referring to. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I believe I am. Coming off of a German CD. But I know there are fans out there that already know which mix it is I'm talking about without even having to play it. And I would, lest I get in trouble with a cease and desist for playing licensed music. All right, next up we hear from a friend of the show, Steve Lank, who writes this. When you were discussing the Higher Love track from Songs of Faith and Devotion on your last podcast, it still reminds me of DM opening the devotional tour at Crystal Palace in 93. With the thunder and lightning effects. Still gives me goosebumps. And here's where I got the news relating to the movie. I watched Mark Wahlberg from Flight Risk in the film, and it does not include Depeche Mode, I'm afraid. The song he sings is Blue Monday by New Order, so shame on that reviewer. Keep up the great work, your friend of the show, Steve Lank. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. All right, next up, David Hudson writes this. Songs of Faith and Devotion was the apex of Depeche Mode's evolution as a band. It's a really interesting take. One that I am not inclined to disagree with. I mean, really, after Songs of Faith and Devotion, everything that's come since then has been somewhat of a variation of everything that came before it. There hasn't been any massive turns in terms of musical style that doesn't harken back to something that happened from Songs of Faith and Devotion on back. Gotta forgive me. This is my last recording for the day, having done my radio show, and I did my Star Wars podcast prior to this, so I'm almost talked out for the day. But that's a really good point. Now, it's not to say that albums haven't been unique and different and haven't had their own style to them, right, and vibe. I mean, Sounds of the Universe certainly does when you go and compare that to something like Memento Mori. However, no album, every album since Songs of Faith and Devotion has some reference point that you can point back to Depeche Mode's history, whereas Songs of Faith and Devotion in and of itself, you can't go and look back at anything prior to that to actually point to the influences until you get to that particular album. The closest thing I would say would maybe be Memento Mori. In and of itself as a whole, even though some tracks do harken back to, as I've made mention, Ghosts Again really does feel like a kindred spirit to I Feel You. Excuse me. my apologies. Enjoy the silence. Like I said, I've talked a lot today. So, interesting point. Something that's worth exploring on future episodes. And if you'd like to comment, of course, drop an email or leave a comment up on YouTube. Tool 4628 writes this. In my opinion, going back to why Songs of Faith and Devotion was so popular from last week's episode. Dave's accelerated drug delving aside, Songs of Faith and Devotion had to be made. If you remember, following Violator, we were saturated with house, techno, and drum and bass. Raves were going off in every warehouse across the country. DJs were popping up everywhere. New Mars Radio 107.1, close to 106.7 on the dial in LA, blew up with exclusive electronic music. My gosh, I had not even thought about that. And you are absolutely right. I completely forgot about Mars Radio back in the day. Because it was a station for the time being that I actually listened to. I felt like I was betraying my beloved K-Rock, mind you. But you're right. I remember Mars Radio. I was one that sat on hold for the latest Razor-made releases weekly and monthly. Everyone was saying, wait till DM come back. They're going to kill it. Well, Depeche Mode said, hold my beer. Each of them said electronic music was everywhere. Martin even mentioned Firestarter, and they felt it was just too much, resulting in them consciously gravitating away from a synth-driven record. Hence, Songs of Faith and Devotion becoming Depeche's rebellious reaction. LOL. Dave's tagging along on the Lollapalooza tour and the Rage Against the Machine Tool circles and being a Soundgarden fanboy. All that inspiration followed him right into the studio. He point blank said that if they wanted to make another Violator, find another effing singer, as many of us know from the famous Songs of Faith and Devotion press release, which I still have on VHS. No longer a player, though. Thank you, John, for your podcast. And thank you, again, for the trip down memory lane. And you make a great point, and you're absolutely right. There's some interesting things, too. I'd love to pick the brain. I know that Steve Lyon was on, was it Matt Vaughn's show? He's made the rounds a bit. I should look at getting him on the show. Interviews in and of itself, right? I know. I'm limited on time. But just the instrumentation on Songs of Faith and Devotion, especially the scratching, which I love on the album. It's just, I really do. It probably is my favorite Depeche Mode record, even though it is, again, it sort of sticks out among the rest of the albums. It still has its connections to what came before it and around it, Violator and Ultra, but it is in and of itself just an absolute masterpiece. All right, next up, Javier writes this. Love everything you do for us devotees, but it's time for DM to pack it up. It's a change of pace. Memento Mori and Definitely Spirit did not cut it for me after waiting years for new music. I used the following rationale when I stopped listening or seeing my favorite old school acts live. Lack of good/new material, relying on back catalog greatest hits, embarrassing image stage clothes, i.e. Robert Smith as an example. Key band members gone. Unfortunately, such bands as The Cure, Journey, The Rolling Stones, and now DM fulfill my criteria. Thanks for the memories, Dave and Martin Javier. All right, so it goes without saying, Javier, I appreciate you writing in, and certainly entitled to your opinion. I could not disagree any harder, especially, while it's subjective, to your criteria here. First off, lack of good new material, that's subjective. But Memento Mori is a stunning album. Certainly leaps and bounds better than Spirit, in my opinion. And there's some classic tracks on that album. When you look at Ghosts Again, I mean, that song for me is a single that is easily right up there with Enjoy the Silence. Did really, really well, but in the world that we live in, if you had released Ghosts Again back at the time when Enjoy the Silence came out, I would speculate that it would have been a major success. But the saturation of music and the way that we consume it now and the lack of radio importance has changed the dynamics quite a bit. But even apart from that, when you look at other tracks, whether it's Soul With Me, even Caroline's Monkey has grown on me considerably. Don't Say You Love Me is another track that's up there, probably in my top 10 favorite Depeche Mode songs ever. So, lack of good new material, I disagree with. Relying on back catalog greatest hits being live, make no mistake, they play about, between 19 and 22 tracks a night? Yeah, they're going to go and play greatest hits to their base. But even then, they played, a significant chunk of Memento Mori during this tour. Embarrassing image and stage clothes, couldn't disagree with you more on that. The band looks fantastic and it has actually matured in their years. Robert Smith aside, I'm not commenting on The Cure, I'm commenting on Depeche Mode. So, again, I don't think it's time for the band to hang it up at all. I still think that they have music left in them to create, as I was talking about earlier in the show. And based on your criteria, I just don't see it. But Javier, I thank you nonetheless. And I certainly do expect to hear from other devotees based off of your comments. All right, lastly today, got a couple of comments here from friend of the show, Chris Culpepper. Left a comment up on YouTube and also dropped me an email. I've combined them for the show. Chris writes this: anticipation and curiosity are the reasons for Songs of Faith and Devotion's success. 3 years of no new material since Violator. A significant image change. Is this going to sound like the same DM? Look at Dave's new look. As well. No, totally agree. Curious, though, what fans did or currently do to curb their DM cravings while patiently awaiting new music. Obviously, as time passes, we are having to wait much longer. A couple of things that I've done out of desperation. Checked out the DM tribute bands and DM cover songs by signed artists. Listened to bands influenced by DM, Nights Are Ebb, Camouflage, etc. Discovered past DM bootlegs and concerts with different live arrangements. Best one, wrote and sang songs in the key of Martin Gore. Still perfecting the DM patch or gum, just like a nicotine addict. Thank you, JJ, Chris. So, love to hear from you regarding that. Certainly love to hear from you regarding Javier's comments. But to what I do personally to curb my DM cravings while awaiting patiently for new music. First off, we're going to get those 4 unreleased tracks. I've no doubt in my mind regarding that. And probably sometime this year. What it's attached to remains to be seen. But I kind of treat it the same way that I do my beloved Star Wars franchise. I do a Star Wars podcast as well. Apart from my weekly radio show, the things that I love in life, God, my wife, my children, my family, right? All those things are way above everything else. But, Depeche Mode, Star Wars, and NASCAR. Those are the 3 things that I'm massive fans of. And I kind of fluctuate between which ones I'm leaning more towards at any given time. NASCAR season's about to start up. Waiting for good Star Wars to come back out. And, of course, with Depeche Mode, I'm doing the podcast. But when it comes to Star Wars and Depeche Mode, I'm less anticipating new music apart from what we're expecting of releases and those tracks we haven't heard, and more just continue to celebrate Depeche Mode and everything that they've already given us. And I do the same thing with Star Wars. I mean, we have so much Star Wars content now. I have unlimited possibilities depending on my mood of what type of Star Wars I want to go and consume when I want to travel to that galaxy far, far away. And the same thing absolutely rings true for Depeche Mode. So when I was younger and we were anticipating and waiting for new music and albums, when we had less of a back catalog to go and enjoy, and more specifically, a back catalog that had a bit of redundancy in it. And I don't mean that as a dig at by any way, shape, or form, but when you look at Songs of Faith and Devotion, Violator, Music for the Masses, Some Great Reward, you get to Some Great Reward and you kind of go on back to Construction Time again. The music is of a similar vein. Certainly switched it up by the time you get to Songs of Faith and Devotion. And if there had never been another album after Songs of Faith and Devotion, I think you could make a similar argument that you've got a lot of music beforehand that you can enjoy. Well, we did. Many albums later. And so now, depending on what type of music you're wanting to listen to, content-wise, vibe-wise, energy-wise, pacing-wise, we have this massive Depeche Mode catalog of album tracks and singles on top of all the remixes that, for me, biding my time between releases is not nearly as difficult a task, right? First world problem. It's not a difficult task, but the anticipation isn't there like it used to be because I have my Depeche Mode catalog to go and refer to whenever I want. And I go through my varying phases. As I've been talking about the past few weeks, I've been on a Songs of Faith and Devotion kick. As I can kind of continue to weave Memento Mori in and out, as that album still just has no burn for me, and it being the most recent release, still being the one that I haven't lived as long a life with. And right now I'm living my life with that album while I continue to go back and listen to previous Depeche Mode. That wraps the show up for this week. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. What the hell is this? It's a Depeche Mode fan that likes to go and talk about Depeche Mode once a week and hopes that people go and listen. And I appreciate the fact that you do. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. No shortage of things that you could respond to from this week's episode. And remember, if you enjoy science fiction, I hope you'll check out my science fiction series, Embark. It's a fast-paced and action-packed science fiction adventure. 7 books in all in the series. Kicking off with Embark Book 1, Earth Faces Its End. Follow pilots Taft, Katha, and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future. If you like science fiction and Depeche Mode, there's a lot of references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect. I embedded into the story, set in 2172, that the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters. So a lot of Depeche Mode fans will get the musical references that I bring about in the 7 books in the series. Go to Amazon.com, search for Embark, E-M-B-A-R-K, or John J-O-N Justice. Again, if you like science fiction with some romance, a lot of really cool technology filled with unique action sequences, then the 7-book Embark series is perfect for you. I wrote it for adults, but it is completely age-appropriate for those 11 and older. Pick up Embark Book 1 today. Available in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook on Amazon.com. I'll talk to you again next week. Until I do, I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you then. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Garth from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
Depeche Mode, the podcast.